Hey, it's Concrete. How you doing today? Today I have the back half of the Capella Silverline flavors to go over. So I have their cinnamon sugar, their butter pecan, their biscuit, their whipped marshmallow, and their fruit circle. So starting off, I have their cinnamon sugar. So this is definitely an additive. It's not like a full-on flavor by itself. There is like a little bit of a sort of very light pastry note in here, but it's kind of chalky, very untoasted, kind of powdery and floury. It tastes a lot like an untoasted Pop Tart, really more than anything else, and it is light, just like barely in the background. So I definitely get a standard Capella Bakery cinnamon from this. This seems to be what's mostly going on. And I'm not a big fan of Capella Bakery cinnamon, but hey, some people are. Um, Cinnamon Danish swirl is a pretty good indicator for that. Like, if you like cinnamon Danish swirl, you probably like the cinnamon note here. Capella cinnamon always tastes a little bit sort of sour and metallic to me, which some people sort of agree with me on. Other people say I'm fucking nuts. But this definitely has the same thing going on. It's a little bit drier, maybe, than like CDS, but I think that's mostly because there isn't as much stuff going on around it. It feels like a sprinkle of like a sprinkle of cinnamon more than anything else. And then for the sugar part, I don't really get like a discrete sugar note. I guess it's a little bit sweet. It could probably pass as sugar. It reminds me a lot of Flavora's pastry zest. But whereas like that has like a granulated texture to it, this feels a little bit softer and like a little bit more powdered, like more of like a sprinkle rather than like an actual coating to it. So I do get like a little bit of light sourness to the base here. Um, I guess you could probably call it tartness. It reminds me of some of the other Capella bakeries. It doesn't have that like very clear tartness like Flora's pastry zest. It's just like kind of a light sort of sour twinge to the entire thing. Um, Honestly, I'm not a huge fan of Capella's bakery cinnamon, and that's kind of why I don't like this. I do feel like it's a little bit on the weaker side too. I think you're probably gonna need 3 to 6%, and even that is sort of as an accent. I don't feel like the cinnamon's overwhelming in that range at all. It just doesn't really ever push to the front or become particularly vibrant. If you were going to use this, I would sort of use it in places where you need that sort of light cinnamon dusting. I think it should go well with like snickerdoodle type recipes, like a cookie with a little bit of cinnamon on top, or maybe even like a coffee cake. There, that tartness isn't really going to bother you as much because generally there's something like some sour cream or something in that coffee cake to give it a little bit of extra tartness. It seems like a better fit for the profile. I can also see using it as a sort of cinnamon additive in like cream profiles, like I could see using it for like a horchata or like an eggnog or something like that too. But yeah, overall, if you like Capella Bakery cinnamon and you want to add just a little bit of it to something, this isn't a bad choice, I guess. So next I have their butter pecan. So this one doesn't really hit for me. I don't know. Um, there's some decent sort of candied butter pecan notes in here, but I feel like the pecan itself is kind of lacking. It tastes a little raw to me. It doesn't have that sort of more roasted butter pecan like warmth to it. It has like almost like a sort of light green note to it. The candy around it is a little bit better. The caramel's a little soft and a little undercooked for me. It doesn't really feel like it developed much color. There's definitely like a caramelish sweetness. I do pick up like a good amount of bakery vanilla in here too, especially at higher percentages, which isn't bad, but it's something to watch out for. And I don't really get much like discrete butter out of this. It doesn't feel like a particularly rich flavor, which is something I'm looking for in a butter pecan. This also seems to have quite a bit of like a cocoa note to it too, which is a little weird. I think it's kind of like dulce de leche flavors where they get that little bit of cocoa towards the back end. This definitely has that going on. And it seems to sort of get a little bit more intense as it steeps. I've noticed it more at like mid-range percentages than really high and really low. But it definitely gets like some dry, dark cocoa on the back end of it. I mean, it's not an awful flavor, by any means. I mean, everything here is fairly palatable. It's just really hard to kind of recommend. Flavor West makes a really good butter pecan that is darker, richer, nuttier, cheaper, and more concentrated. So maybe just use that one instead. This doesn't make a really great case for its existence. So if you were going to be using this, if you already picked it up though, or you just want to ignore me, which I would honestly recommend most of the time, I'd use about 4% as an accent, maybe up to like 6 or 7% as a primary note. You'll definitely get a flavor in there. I don't know, it just doesn't do a lot of what I want a butter pecan to do. Okay, so next I have their Silverline Biscuit flavor. So when they say biscuit, they went all continental on us, and apparently they mean a cookie, like in the European sense or the British sense of the word, I guess. It's definitely a cookie flavor. It's sweeter, a little bit flat to me. It reminds me of two things, and the first of which is like smelling a freshly opened package of those like dry ass oatmeal cookies with like the icing on there. Like it feels like there's something a little bit nuttier going on than just like straight flour in the cookies. It feels like there's something just a little bit darker. It doesn't really have a corresponding texture, but the general taste of it's kind of in that direction. It also has like a pretty prominent like vanilla frosting note, and that has like a little bit of like a drier texture. I mean, you could say like it's sort of sprinkled with something, or it just reminds me of like that hard royal icing on those oatmeal cookies more than anything else. The other thing it really reminds me of is just the graham crust part of TPA's cheesecake graham crust. It has that same kind of like softer texture to it. And it also has that strange kind of coconut note. And there are people who never pick out the coconut in TPA graham crust, and more power to you. That's great. Phenomenal. Great to be you. But I get a lot of coconut out of that flavor, and I get that same kind of coconut out of this flavor. It just doesn't go quite far enough to feel like it's a full coconut cookie. But it has just that like kind of whiff of coconut suntan lotion around it. It's not my favorite thing in the world, but if you don't mind coconut, it's not that bad. It's not that overwhelming. So part of my problem with these Silverline flavors is that they all seem to have like a really soft texture, and I'm getting that a lot with this. It doesn't have much like either crispiness or fluffiness to it. It just tastes kind of flat and stale. It doesn't do the crunchy thing as well as like Flavor Arts cooking. It doesn't do the fluffy thing as well as like Capella's sugar cookie. The texture here just doesn't really do it for me. And even like cranking up the percentage and stuff, you can get a fairly clear cookie flavor, even though it's a little bit on the soft side, but that texture just really doesn't follow along behind it. And that's definitely like my criticism of this line in general, is that there just isn't much texture or richness or vibrancy to these flavors. So you can try to use that to your advantage, really, if you're mixing with this. If you have a profile that needs just a hint of cookie, like an ice cream or a milkshake or something, where you don't want all that texture up front and center, but you do want like a hint of cookie flavor in there, I could see using this around like 4% as an accent flavor. But in terms of like building a standalone cookie flavor, I wouldn't really recommend this one, just because I don't feel like you get enough texture there. You could probably lay in a more textured bakery underneath and still use this in like that 4% accent roll with maybe like 2% FA cookie if you want it like really hard and crunchy, or like 3 or 4% Capella sugar cookie if you want something fluffier. But it doesn't really strike me as all that essential. So next I have Capella's Whipped Marshmallow, which sounds promising. While it sounds promising, this flavor is horseshit, basically. I do get a very light, kind of drier vanilla, like cereal marshmallow flavor, but it's really light, and it's not a concentration issue. I've tried this everywhere from 0.25% all the way up to 25%. You just will not get like any kind of actual marshmallow texture out of this, and that vanilla doesn't even get particularly overbearing. It's just ridiculously soft. It is a very, very subtle flavor, and subtle is not necessarily something I want to associate with a big sugar bomb like a marshmallow. I do get some vague vanilla out of this. It seems like a brighter frosting type vanilla more than anything else. But yeah, it's not really all that present. It's just wispy, it's light, it's thin. There's a tiny bit of texture here, but it's pretty nominal overall. I mean, it just doesn't do much. I mean, you could buy this, I guess. You could buy this and you could be like trying to crank it up to like starting at like 5% for a very, very light hit of vanilla to a recipe. But don't. I mean, this is stupid. This whole like, oh, this is markedly cheaper. It's still more expensive than Flavor West and TFA, first off. And secondly, it's just not a good flavor. It's not concentrated enough to actually work with. I mean, you can get a very similar effect from like 0.25% of any of the other marshmallows, or a little bit of meringue, or some Flavor Art Vanilla Classic, or some Innerwear Shisha Vanilla. Any of those is a much better option than supporting Capella's Silverline Whipped Marshmallow. I realize this sounds biased, but after having to test out all these flavors, I need to rant about something. These just aren't concentrated flavors, and just increasing the percentages doesn't work. They're all very soft, and they don't have a whole lot of presence to them. So we'll end on somewhat of a high note here. I have Capella's Silverline Fruit Circles. So right off the bat, the flavor here is actually pretty good. It's a pretty decent take on Fruit Circles. It manages to sidestep the whole like lemon pledge thing that a lot of other Fruit Circles flavors have. I mean, TFA's Fruit Circles is pretty atrocious, and it's mostly lemon pledge. This is quite a bit better. It does sort of still lead with that citrus, but it's like a softer, more accurate citrus than like straight floor cleaner, which is nice. I also get like actually some of like that sort of orangey red, whatever artificial flavor that's supposed to be, sort of back end on the cereal too. Overall, I mean, you can taste like most of the colors of Fruit Loops, which is cool. There's also like this drier meringue kind of frosting note to it. It's definitely a dry cereal. I do pick up like a nice like malty accent to it. The flavor here is actually really spot on. Like this is a pretty legit Fruit Circles flavor. Like I said, I like it quite a bit more than TFA's. I'm not huge into cereal profiles, but you know, usually what I do is pick up Flavor West Fruity Flakes, even though, you know, it's going to give me cancer from the sugar syrup or whatever. This is a pretty solid option overall. My big complaint about this is the same complaint that I have about the other bakeries in this line. There just isn't much texture. While I get like a full Fruit Loops type flavor, it feels like it needs just a little bit more grit and grain and presence to really do a dry Fruit Loop right. And again, I want to call this a little bit on the weak side too, in terms of concentration. I feel like this is probably workable. I think if you want to use a different flavor for your actual grain for the cereal, you might be able to slide in some Capella Cereal 27, or like a lower percentage of one of the other Fruit Loops flavors, or even like a TPA or Flavor West Crispy Rice or whatever, to get some actual body in there, and then like lay this in at like maybe 5-6% over it. I think you could approach like a dry cereal vape. The other thing you could do is use this a little bit higher, you know, maybe all the way up to even 10%, and use it with some creams and some milky stuff just to kind of get that cereal milk flavor. I think it's going to be good for that just because it doesn't have that overwhelming texture. But a lot like the 27 Fish and the 27 Bears, this is a pretty good representation of sort of a niche profile. So everybody likes hot takes, right? Out of this Silverline, I have to say I'm not particularly impressed. The concentration is just kind of low. The cost savings isn't that high, and the only stuff that I'd kind of recommend out of it would be that Fruit Circles if you're super into Fruit Circles, the 27 Fish if you're super into Swedish Fish, and the 27 Bears if you're super into gummy bears. I mean, they're very, very profile dependent concentrates. The taste on them is spot on. With the Fruit Circles, you're going to have some issues with texture, but if those are your profiles, then sure, go for it. I think they're pretty good options. The rest of this, I'm not impressed with. You know, the TPA Blueberry Extra broke my heart, so there's that. You know, it's a good flavor. It's just too soft. The Whipped Marshmallow is just hot garbage. It shouldn't be as weak as it is, but somehow here we are. It's 2017, and they just gave us a flavor that weak. And honestly, the rest of it I'd skip just because there's other better, cheaper equivalents out there for these flavors. But yeah, I mean, if you're looking at the Silverline and you want some trashy profiles, the trashy ones are okay. Other than that, I'd probably skip it. But I hope this helped. Thank you for watching. I do appreciate it. I'll catch you later.